Hey there YouTube, Doc's Motorcycle Service. Welcome back to the garage. So we are now in August and the heat is upon us. I'm telling you, this humidity is whooping an old man's butt. Today we're going to continue with the wiring harness series. We're stumbling and bumbling and rumbling our way through this, but before we get into that, I want to take a moment and talk to you about a major tech tip. You've heard me talk about a service manual and how important a service manual is to basically anything that you're working on. If you're dealing with an electrical issue and you're having to look at this, that can be kind of confusing. You're sitting here looking at different colored wires, maybe only about 9 wires in different colors, but you got a purple wire coming from the oil pressure switch and you got a purple wire coming from the left turn signal. Well, you know damn well them wires ain't going to go to the same places, so it can be confusing, especially when you're working over here and then you're looking up here and then you're going back here and you're having to run over there. It can get quite confusing. So I'm going to offer you a really cool tech tip right here. Instead of trying to look at all this, grab you some colored pencils and some colored pens and draw out what you're working on. I'm sure that you'll agree that looking at this schematic is a lot easier than looking at this, and a lot less confusing, because basically what you're doing is you're breaking out what you're working on. In this instance, working on the handlebar controls, and then as you get done with the handlebar controls, break it down even more. You wouldn't believe the headache that it's going to save you. Trust me, I would not lie to you. Continuing on with the tech tip, here's the diagram that came with the dash kit. If you'll notice, on the bottom I drew the terminal block and where it goes in. Well, I blew this up onto a piece of paper, made a copy of it so I wouldn't screw this up, used this as the master, took this piece here, and then drew my wires where they needed to go. Before I get too far, check out the Facebook page. Getting some attention over there, getting some likes over there, getting some comments over there. Again, it's just a more simpler place to leave a comment. So we got the controls mounted. We got our steel braided weave on here. If you've not seen this, I'll put a link up for it. Here's our Pro 1 dash kit. Here's our handlebar controls coming into the 8-pin connectors and going down till they get back here to the terminal block. The front loom, which brings the power to the terminal block, and over here we have the rear loom that goes to the starter, the solenoid, the ignition coil, the brake light switch, and so on and so forth. And we're not going to mess with this except for one thing. This big wire right here is the wire that goes to the starter solenoid. Well, the positive battery cable comes to the starter solenoid and attaches to the same lug that this wire attaches to. This wire goes through the loom and gives power to all of this. It energizes this when you turn the switch. Then that power travels back down the front loom into the terminal block, which gives power to the front wiring harness for one of the controllers and the other front harness for the other handlebar controls. Comes up here respectfully. Now this is where it gets kind of hinky. And what I mean by hinky is this. If you've never really thought about how your motorcycle works, remember that the switches on the handlebars are much like the light switch you have on a wall at the house. Your power company runs a main line down the street And then it has a feeder line that comes off of it, and it comes up to your house to the breaker switch over here, or the breaker box on the wall. When the breakers are turned on, then that feeds power to the different parts of your house. If you look inside your breaker box, you're going to see different breakers for kitchen, living room, bathroom, bedroom, washroom, garage. Well, in your living room, you have switches that turn on lights. You have switches that turn on fans. Whatever your switches turn on, they might turn you on. Woohoo! I'm not getting into that here. But at that point, you have power to that switch. So when you flip that switch up, ta-da! Same thing happens on the motorcycle. You have power coming from the battery up to the dash. When you turn the ignition switch, it energizes wire that goes back to that terminal block. Now, each one of those little wiring harnesses on the side, and I'll put a picture of them up here, have 7 wires in. Typically, one of those wires is going to run power to a switch, and another wire is going to take the wire back to the terminal block. And from that point, it's going to light up something. For example, the turn signals. Alright? The turn signals have to get power to the in side, or the in wire, to the turn signal switch. And then when you push in the turn signal switch, the circuit's closed, and then power goes back down another wire through that same harness to the flasher relay. And then the power goes from the flasher relay, and because it's now a flasher relay, it's going to light up the turn signals. Well, guess what? You have to have a wire now that comes back up to the front turn signal out of that terminal block, and you have to have a wire that goes to the rear turn signal for that terminal block. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to give you a brief example here in just a moment. And again, what I didn't cover while we were back there before was that hornet's nest of wires everywhere. The reason that's looking all nasty right now is I want to make sure I get those wires set in their proper place before I start cutting off extra wires. When I get done with this, those wires are going to come out. Well, let me just show you. Again, all of this is loose. Once I get this set where I want it to be at, then we'll tighten this down. And this bird's nest here, I'll come in here, for example, and take this yellow wire that runs all the way over here to the back, and once this is laid down where it needs to be at, I'll trim that yellow wire up and put just enough wire flex on it to plug into that, so all this lays nice and flat. It's going to set up a battery under here. We're going to get it grounded to the frame, and I'm going to show you how to test the turn signal light. I showed you in a previous video how to use an ohms meter, and I also did an electrical video explanation, or a motorcycle wiring electrical system explanation. I will put links up to both of those videos right here, respectfully. But as I've mentioned before, every time I do something on the electrical system, I test it. Chasing down an electrical short is it's a chore. So why would I put this whole system back together without testing it as I went to get everything back together and figure out something doesn't work? But if you test it along each stage, you know everything's working. And it's not that complicated. We're going to do it in layman's terms like we're doing this whole series, so you can do this yourself. Okay, now we're set up. First things first, tech tip, safety tip. Make sure the ignition switch is in the off position. Here's our battery. The oil tank, or the oil bag, on this model Harley Davidson usually sits right here, and the battery sits down inside it. What we've done is we have run a jumper wire from the negative side of the battery up to where the negative battery post mounts on the frame. We've used a positive jumper wire, and you can use anything you want to, but just make sure that they're color coded so you know what's positive and what's negative. We've run that down here to the positive wire on the coil. And this is the main wire that attaches, we talked about this earlier, attaches to the starter solenoid and runs up through the loom and powers all of this up here. The power from the front loom is coming back and feeding the terminal block. We know, and I'll put some pictures up here, that the green wire coming from the front loom, this wire here, is the green wire that provides power to the green wire going to the turn signals in both harnesses. So here is the harness going to the left controllers, here is the harness going to the right controllers, and here's that green wire. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a roach clip or an alligator clip, one of these things. We're going to hook these two wires together, we're going to turn the switch, and we're going to see if we have power. Got our turn signal switch turned on, and we're going to press the button and we're going to see what happens. And there you go. We can see that the flasher relay is working, and if I had the dash cover on here, this would tell you that this is the left turn signal indicator light. Now we'll come over here, we're going to press the right turn signal, and we got the right turn signal indicator. Turn it back off for safety while we're talking. There you go. Just demonstrated to you how all it works. Now what you have to do to test everything else, using your wiring diagram, you come in here because, well, I guess you can do the high beam. You have a high beam light indicator here, you have a neutral safety switch here, and then you have an oil light indicator here. What you do in these, like the front brake switch, you would use your ohms meter, grounded, take your positive, put it on the terminal block where the out wire from the front brake switch comes in. You pull that handle in, you get a reading right here. You know it's working. Start button, same thing. Over here, your horn button, your high and forgive me, YouTube, your high and low beam. So at that point, and I'll go ahead and test all these. So we tested everything. It all works. So at this point, this area is good. So what's left? This being the rear loom, and your rear loom wiring harness says that purple wire goes to your left turn signal, one red wire goes to the brake light, the black one goes to the running light, the brown one goes to the right turn signal. Your 14 gauge wire, which is your bigger one, goes to the same post that the battery goes to. The black and red goes to the solenoid. The yellow goes to the neutral switch for the transmission. The red goes to the rear brake light switch. Remember, you got two brake switches on this. You got one for the front, which is in the controller, and you got one down here on the right for the rear brake, and then the oil pressure switch. So we really can't do a whole lot with this. We're going to go ahead and button up the front end of the motorcycle, and by that I mean we're going to go ahead and put the lights on the front. I'm also going to mention that there's going to be a sidebar video after this talking about an 1157 bulb, which you're going to see in the turn signal running lights right here. Might be a little informative for you. You know, these videos, they come out, I may put them up at the same time so you can link to it. If not, just watch for it to be released as the next video in the series, and the way to make that happen is to subscribe. So we're going to put the splash pan on. We're going to mount the headlight. We are going to put the frame on for the spots and the running lights, and then we're going to get them configured in here to figure out how we're going to wire these. I found it fascinating that every one of these bikes you see going down the road has the spots and the turn signals on the turn signal spot bar on the front of it. But in the 86 wiring harness, there is no indication that this bike came with those. Just a school of thought here. Maybe a little tech tip. Maybe a little safety tip. Be like Brett's safety tip. Not Brett, that was Aaron. There's two schools of thought on how to wire the spotlights. As you can see from the pic, it's a factory toggle switch that goes on the inside left side of the pan, the splash pan behind the headlight. It doesn't offer a suggestion on how to run it and where to run it to. One school of thought is to run it directly to the battery. The only problem with that is the separate toggle switch is they're either on or off. And you're like, okay, well that's not a problem. Well, it might be, because that means even when your ignition switch is in the off position, that toggle switch still has power going to it. So if you're riding down the road with the spots on, and everybody seems to do that now, and you pull into the diner and it's daylight and you jump off of it and walk away after you turn your ignition switch on, those spots are still going to be on. And they're 4.5-inch spotlights, YouTube. I mean, them boys are drawing some amperage. Looking forward in the wiring diagram for the Heritage Softail, it suggests that you tie them into the headlight. And I'm just a little concerned about that, because you got one wire coming from the terminal block on the low beam side. So if you flip it to high beam, then even if that toggle switch is on, those spotlights are going to go off. Now I know in some states that's a law. We don't need no stinking law. I like my spots on all the time. If you ride a lot, you want every damn light on the motorcycle on that you can, so these idiots on the cell phones will see you coming and going down the road. But at the same time, it's a nice safety issue, because then when you turn the ignition switch off, power goes away from it. Looking at the terminal block, is 4 rows across and 10 rows down each. I'll put a picture up here for you. And if you can see the white lines in there, the white lines indicate a block. Anything plugged into one slot of the block will give power to the other 3. Section 3, I think it is, there's 8 connectors, which means that you can run power in on one of those 8 and get power out of the other 7. And that row goes off when you turn the ignition switch off. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the power for that toggle switch, the one you see right here, down through the frame and plug it into one of those. And I'm going to do the same thing with the fender tip light for the front. But we're also going to go ahead and put some steel braid weave on these wires. So I'm going to get started on that. If you want to see how the steel braid weave is put on and you've not watched any of the other videos, should be a link popping up right here. Go take a look at that video and then come back and finish watching this. So what we're going to do is we're going to get these things mounted on here. Stick around and I'll show you what that looks like when we get done. So here's the pics of us placing everything back on there and getting it squared up like it should be. And as you can see, we just took it a piece at a time. These things are like a puzzle. As I've mentioned before, always just take pictures in the order that you took them apart. Take Ziploc bags, label the information in your own words. That way it's easier to find. So that way when you're ready for it, you can come back and pick it right up and go, well, here you are. So, and ta-da! So we got all this tied in. You remember our 2 handlebar controls coming down on each side that tapped into the original harnesses that took this back to the terminal block. And as you can see, that's all nice and neat. It's laying nice and flat. What we had to do, as I mentioned earlier, because there was no wiring diagram for the spots and the turn signals and the running lights, I created a separate wiring harness down through here, tied it in to the terminal block real good. And if you'll take a look here at the wiring diagram, you'll notice that it says that the power green wire coming from the front loop has to be split in two to go to each left and right side turn signals respectfully. Well, I created a little jig right here that does that. You can see the green wire coming out of the main loom, and it comes down here, right through here, on this side here, and then it splits through this T connector, comes back up, and each wire goes back up to the turn signals respectfully. And then we just put this right in here and we tuck it away, and I'll probably put a zip lock on, or a zip tie on that to make it lay there. So as you can see, I'll try to put up side by side photos here. This is a lot more neater look than it was when we were just tying it in. You can see that it lays down nice and flat. It's got some wiggle room there, so if the seat does lay on it, it's going to not interfere with breaking any wires or cracking any wires or putting any undue pressure on the wires themselves. I've got everything in the front end there buttoned up where I want it to be at. I've got all the male and female wire connectors on and connected, and everything's working. And I've got those zip tied where I want them at. Real happy with the way this thing turned out. Fingers crossed, hands together, prayers up top. It's the first motorcycle that I have completely rewired. Here's your tech tip. Take your time. Watch for the next video, and the best way to do that is to subscribe. Watch some of the advertisements when they play through. I'm not doing this to make money. I'm doing this to help you, but at the same time, you can help me. When the advertisement comes up, if you feel like you want to let it play out for a little bit, and it's only going to be like 25 seconds of your life. Stop! So we had to reshoot the end of this video. The only things that are left of the wiring harness portion of this series on Hot Donna is the rear loom. Can't do anything with those until we get the fender on. And right now, we have a question as to whether or not we're going to go back with the factory fender, or if we're going to go back with a stretched fender painted to match Donna's original colors. The key thing about going with a different fender is where the bike rides on the ground, and you really can't get a feel for where the bike is going to ride on the ground until you get all the weight on the bike and get the shocks adjusted. It's a puzzle. It's a sequence of events. You can put it in a different way, but if you put it in different ways, things are going to be in the way, and then you may have to re-loosen something that you've already tightened. So we're going to try to put this thing in the proper way so we don't have to go back and readjust anything later. So the last video in the wiring harness series is going to cover the rear loom. We're just going to have to play that one by ear. We're going to have to study on that one a little bit. Keep in mind, none of this stuff is free. It's all costing money. So the owner of the bike is wanting to make sure that he stays within his budget. And I would highly recommend you do the same thing. There's another tech tip. Set your budget and then stay within it, because I'm going to tell you something. It's real easy to let a project like this get out of hand and start spending more money than you had planned for. Wrapping it up, thanks for coming by the garage. Stay tuned for the next video, and the easiest way to catch the next video is to subscribe. So go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Give us a thumbs up when you're done watching the video. Rate it, comment, share it, ask a question. It's not popping up in the background right here. Maybe it'll pop up here in a second. Swing by the Facebook page, leave a comment, answer a question. Check out some stuff there. We're starting to get some activity over there. So YouTube, I appreciate you coming by the garage as always. Handle your business, save some money, and ride safe. And cut.